They were talking about 15-foot storm surge. That would have been absolutely catastrophic. Right now, it looks as though the storm is downgraded to a 2. It's now moved inland, which is a good thing, unless you're in the path of this thing, because it's just going to be relentless for a while. But then it just dies down a lot faster when it can't feed off the warm water of the Gulf. But right now, the storm surge in Tampa, I think they have downgraded that significantly from the 15 feet. Yeah. Our Brad Bell has been riding the storm out. He joins us in downtown Tampa. And Brad, I'm just wondering if you heard anything as far as estimates about how high they expect that storm surge to come in once the storm moves north of you.
Yeah, no, I haven't had the ability to gather any information. Although, Jonathan, I'm not surprised to hear any of those storm surge reports be lessened because so much water blew out. It was quite a sight to see today. And you know what? If you just look at the rotation of the storm, if you just look at the wind direction, it just doesn't really make sense that there's going to be a big destructive storm surge here. The wind now is blowing so hard away, and then on the backside, it's not really going to be as strong. So, the hope is that it won't be that bad. Look, I'm taking personally a little bit of a break. I've got full shelter of a building right here, so I'm not getting buffeted too much. You can still look down the block here and see, at each cross street, the wind is just ripping. However, I will say, and cameraman Josh agrees with me, it seems as though it's less strong now than it was even an hour ago. So I have to hear from you precisely where the storm is, but I know that we're still in the range where we're getting the hurricane force winds. But even as I flip around and get to the end of the block here closest to us, and you can see all this, the wind blowing here in the middle of the block. Sorry, Josh, I walked a little too fast for you to spin around. This cameraman, by the way, anybody out watching, these guys worked so hard. Wind, rain, got to protect all of our gear. But you can see the wind still blowing here. But I'm going to say it is not as strong as it was earlier. Not seeing the bits and pieces coming off of the palm trees anymore. Certainly nothing more like we showed you earlier today about the piece of the sign that came crashing down right next to us. And that thing's been blowing around. It's out here right now, this red piece of plastic from the Sheraton sign. And since we've been telling that story, we solved the mystery. We figured out where it came from finally. It shouldn't have been all that hard. Josh can pan up, and you can see the logo of the building there, and all the little lights are exposed because the cover blew off from the S of the Sheraton. And that moved from over there to where we were standing about this way, and I would say that that's when the winds were the strongest. So we don't know if it's going to get any worse, but right now I would say it seems to be lessening a little bit. We have seen some power outages. We can tell because we've seen the blue arc of the power of transformers blowing and power lines coming down and that sort of thing. But not here. Mercifully, we still have the power on. You can see the palm trees blowing around, but no sign of a storm surge. The Hillsborough River's still way down, and we've got our fingers crossed that it's not going to be too bad. The rain is lessened a little bit as well right now. We could just be in a band.
Yeah, I think
Jonathan,
that
Michelle?
is the case, Brad. I know you don't have access to the radar right at this moment, but we can tell you that it does appear that the storm is tracking a little bit more to the right, which is in favor of the Tampa Bay area. Good news for the folks there. But certainly you are not out of the thick of it. Our meteorologists believe that you still have about 6 more hours to put up with these bands of rain, so the intensity may vary from time to time, but there will be heavy downpours, extremely gusty winds as well. So Brad, by far, still a lot more to go here.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying that this storm is over. But, having covered some of these storms, you get a feel for when, okay, now it's powerful enough to do some damage. And or now it's just a spectacle and a sight to see, and the damage would be minor. So, right now it seems to be lessening, and we know it is not done. This town's still very much under a curfew. Mandatory evacuation orders in these so-called flood zone A's like we are here. all the right decisions were made, and hopefully Tampa Bay is going to get through this thing. But no, I know it's not done yet. But the backside of hurricanes is never as strong as the front side. We do know that.
And another bit of good news, Brad, they're also projecting that those storm surges won't be as intense as we initially believed. They are probably going to be more in the range of 7 feet in terms of maximum storm surge, whereas earlier the projections were 15 and better. So that is a bit of good news for those who live right there on the coast. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear that number as well, because they can handle that, right? So it also has to coincide with when high tide is. And so in South Tampa, the area that they were most worried about, the low-lying neighborhoods out there, high tide was going to be at about 3:30 a.m. And so it's still empty. I mean, the wind is still blowing that water away. They can probably handle that number that you just said without having too much major damage there, because the tide might not be quite so high when, anyway, the regular tide when the storm surge comes in.
Anything about this storm, because you've covered other hurricanes in the past, what about this storm? Was there anything unique about it or something different about this one?
You know what? This storm has lived a long time, and I've been down here with Josh Knight, and it's been fun for me. We reporters are out alone with our cameramen covering stories a lot, and you don't get to spend a lot of time with our meteorologists. And I've learned a good bit from Josh Knight about how long storms last. This one has lived a long time, and it's big. We've moved around a little bit. We came down on Thursday to cover this storm. We had to come Thursday because it was the last flight. We went to Fort Lauderdale because that's where it was going to go. That's what we do. We go to where the news is and we tell stories. And so we flew into Fort Lauderdale, and we're also going to help out our station in West Palm, our company station, like we are now with Gainesville. And it changed so much. I mean, that track, this thing's been going so slowly. The track has changed so much from East Coast to West Coast. And now, earlier today, this thing was going to come right here, but now it's gone a little bit inland. It is an unusual storm. It was so powerful early, and now, it's rapidly diminishing. And we hope that it's done doing damage. Someone said to me earlier this week, boy, if it went through the sugar fields in the heart of Florida, that would probably be the best thing. And all these storms are a little different. You never know where they're going to go, and the power is always impressive. When you get winds over 70 miles, think about a big summer thunderstorm. You get that 60-mile-an-hour gust, and you can see how much damage they can do. When you get these sustained, even 70-mile-an-hour winds, barely hurricane, 80-mile-an-hour winds that don't sound like much compared to the 180s that we had seen, the 200, 225-mile-an-hour gusts, they're all still impressive. But I think the length of this one, the size of this one, and just the bizarre meandering path it's taken has made this one unusual. Personal story for me, and I'll share this. My wife and I have been married 30 years, and I saw the other day that the place that we went for our honeymoon in the British Virgin Islands was destroyed. Our honeymoon 30 years ago, and that place was wiped out. We went on a 30th anniversary trip this year, and we went to St. Thomas, and one of the places that we saw lost its roof and damage was suffered there. And so, this one, these are things that meant something to me, and I know to many other people as well. So our hearts go out to those folks in the Caribbean and to those in Florida that are suffering. So that's what's struck me personally about this storm.
It was so big and so powerful. In fact, this was the most powerful storm to ever swirl in the Atlantic. It was a Category 5 for many, many days as it made its way through the islands, and it racked those islands. I mean, Barbuda has 95% of the dwellings are gone. I mean, they're just destroyed. And that's where, people were killed down there. They decided they'd ride it out, and they were in wood homes. They didn't stand a chance. 150-mile-an-hour winds.
No. And, it's hard to know what that wind feels like. Again, I'm giving myself a little break here with some shelter because I've been standing out in it since about 4:30 this afternoon. But, imagine driving down the road at the speed limit, 65 miles an hour, and you put your hand out, right? And you play that little game where your hand flies up and down. And that's just 55, 65 miles an hour. Imagine twice that speed. That's when you see the pictures of the people's faces peeling back, in the old NASA tests. Those are powerful winds and so destructive. The building codes around here, hurricane glass, you hear all of these things, but it's so sad personally to see what's happened in the Caribbean. And look, people are suffering here. Expenses are being incurred. People had to evacuate. They've gone to hotels that they've had to pay for. They're going to come home and they're going to find a tree on their roof. Their car maybe got some water in it. The costs of these things is just absolutely tremendous. Even as we stand here and we talk about how it's diminishing, I know that this storm is hurting people right now in so many different ways. Yeah.
There's no question. And, Governor Scott said it best when he was warning Floridians about this storm. He said, listen, we can replace things. We can't fix people. So just evacuate.
Yep.
And what's the worst to happen? So you got a road trip, you spend a few $100s, but you and your family are safe at the end of it. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know what? I mean, I've heard talk about this, and I've seen it myself firsthand. A lot of people don't necessarily have that option. And I was at a shelter the other day in where was it? In Delray Beach, Atlantic High School in Delray Beach. And I walked into the shelter, said hello, introduced, and they told me the policy was no cameras inside to show the folks that were there. I agree with that policy 100%, to give those folks the privacy and the dignity they deserve. But I went into a high school gymnasium in Delray Beach. Someone's getting out of the car here. What are they going to do? Well,
trying to get on TV.
All right. So there's the contrast. These guys are having a good time. They're grown adults, and they're out here having a good time. We're talking about people in a shelter. So, I'll tell you this story.
We're going to check back with you, Brad. We're going to check back with you in a few minutes. You want to save this? Oh, no, they're leaving. Bye, guys.
No, they're good. Look, they're good. They're good guys. There's a 90-year-old woman I talked to at the shelter the other day. It was really, really hot, really sticky down there. And she was sitting in her wheelchair in front of this high school. And I went over to her and I said, can I help you in any way? Is there anything that I can do for you? And she said, well, they don't have any beds or cots for me in there, and if I lie down on the floor, I can't get back up again. And what would you like me to do? And she said, well, I'm just gathering my strength so that I can go home, and I'll ride it out there. I go into the shelter and I go into the gymnasium, and there's 100 people in there, and air mattresses, blankets, that sort of thing. They're going to be fine, right? The shelter is providing them shelter. But there was a police officer there, and I saw him holding the hand of a little child. The little child was scared and actually didn't want to use the restroom because he was unaccustomed to it. And the high school was a scary place for this little elementary school student. The officer told me there was a 95-year-old D-Day veteran in there that needed care. So that's what this storm has done. There's an economic loss, but there's fear, there's inconvenience, and it hurt me to see this lady the other day who was alone. She had nobody with her there. I'm not going to say there weren't relatives that cared about her, but it's just that there she was alone at that moment, fearful. Those are the human stories of these hurricanes, even as we marvel at the power. And look, guys come out and have fun, but these storms are serious business, and people do suffer.
Yeah, they are.
Sure.
No question, Brett. A lot of uncertainty, especially for folks, even when they go back home. What will they find?
Yeah.
And we know social media playing a big role in terms of getting our cameras into areas that we can't necessarily get to at this moment because it's just not safe. A lot of people taking matters into their own hands, filming, recording what's happening in their area. And for that, we want to check in now with Annalisa Gale. She's monitoring social media for the latest images coming into our newsroom. Annalisa, what are you seeing?
Well, Michelle, you're exactly correct. With the fascination, a lot of people picking up their cell phones, going out there themselves and filming what they're seeing. This one from Adam Doak on Instagram, this obtained by CNN, shows some of the flooding in downtown Miami earlier today. As you can see, the debris, all the water rushing down the street. And I actually checked in on his Instagram page to see if he obtained any more video, and he did. There's some nighttime video that he shared on Instagram, and he shared this caption. He said it was hard to see things, but things have calmed down considerably. Streets are still flooded, but far less than earlier. No rain and moderate wind compared to earlier. Looks like the worst is past us, but you know, this is still a very serious situation. This is some more video obtained by CNN showing dozens of trees down on Fisher Island in Miami this evening. So as you can see again with the debris, all the water that covered that street, and it was just hard to look at, but as you can see right there, lots of destruction in that area. And from the NWS Tampa Bay on Twitter, they're saying extreme wind warning in effect for Polk County through 12:45 a.m. 80 to 90 mile per hour winds still in place near what's left of the eye wall. So lots of warnings still coming in tonight. Gainesville PD putting out, please stay inside. Earlier we stressed this. We're receiving multiple reports of trees down on roadways. And Miami PD, they're warning about looting tonight. Again, Jonathan, you had mentioned something about that earlier in the newscast. Miami PD putting out the suspects' pictures. As you can see, they're blurring the images, but they're telling people thinking about looting, ask these guys how that turned out. Stay indoors, hashtag. Lots of caution being urged here. The people of Florida are grateful. This is from Governor Rick Scott. He says the people of Florida are grateful for the outpour of support from 28 states and D.C. to help respond to Irma. So again, the governor thanking all the first responders and everyone showing their support tonight for Florida and helping out where they can. And we're already seeing one of the first images, front page of the newspaper from the Tampa Bay Times. This is for tomorrow. It says Irma's wind and surge strike hard, cutting power to millions. Tampa Bay gets weakened, but still dangerous hurricane. So lots of images coming in on social media. Still some fascination, people going out and getting their own video tonight. I'll send it back to you guys.
Never a smart thing to do. Annalisa, thanks very much. I want to let you know, really, we are not downgrading this storm at all. What's happening right now is this storm continues to trek up the central part now of Florida. This is still a very dangerous storm. This is not one to be trifled with. This is the kind of storm that's going to leave destruction, and it's going to leave some problems in its path. We have millions of people that are sitting in the dark right now. The power is gone, and it could be days before they get power back on because poles have been ripped out of the ground, lines have been taken down. This is not just something they got to restring. They have to redo everything. So it's a problem.
Weeks. It could be weeks.
Well, let's hope not that long, but it's going to be a process for sure.
And standing by, we have Ryan Miller, and one of the concerns that we have at this point is, you know, this storm was initially Category 5, then it went down to 4, then 3, then 2, and it could be a 1 by the time it hits the Tampa area. A lot of people hear 1 and think, oh, no big deal. I can deal with that.
Well, and the issue we have to really consider, we've had between 5 and 8 inches of rain in many locations here. And folks, I don't want to downplay this here. We still have the strongest part of the storm coming in after midnight. In fact, we can take a look at the satellite and radar combined right now. And this satellite image right now, just to the south of Orlando, if you look at the image, see that bright red color just to the south of Orlando? That does not show any sign of weakening. If it did, we'd see more greens and yellows coming in. It is solid. It's coming our way to the north at about 14 miles per hour. And we are going to get wind gusts between 70 and even 85 miles per hour between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. So some big time winds coming in here through the overnight, and with all that rain, that saturated ground, we're going to be watching some trees come down here and of course taking down power lines. So if you're watching us and you're still up this evening across the county here, across Gainesville, we have big winds coming in here. You're going to want to keep that phone on if you go to bed, and make sure you're keeping by anything that could potentially warn you of some bad weather coming in here with the heavy winds, and of course that potential for tornadoes. Still at a Category 2 strength in terms of storms. This Category 2 hurricane moving off towards Orlando at about 14 miles per hour, and I want to give you an idea of how far out those winds are extending from the center of this storm. 80 miles on either side of the center of circulation. That's pretty much the entire peninsula of Florida, folks. So this storm will continue to push off to the north. The good news, it will start to lose strength as it pushes up towards Tallahassee. Eventually it will become a Category 1 early tomorrow morning, and then as it moves its way north, we will see its forward speed increase. It will be downgraded to a tropical storm hitting Georgia, and then eventually a tropical depression. But lots of wind and lots of rain to come here through the next several hours, and this is not going to wrap up here until tomorrow afternoon. Into the 60s and 70s, wind gusts between 20 and 50 miles per hour in many places across lots of our area right now. And we're watching on satellite and radar a couple of things. You can see this forward motion in the storm, the heaviest precipitation still on the north side of the circulation, and this feeder band coming right across the Gulf Stream, moving with that counterclockwise rotation right into Daytona Beach. It's this feeder band that has my attention, and I think we could be dealing with a few isolated tornadoes as all this energy, all this rotation comes streaming right in and towards Gainesville here over the next several hours. So 75 from Gainesville to Cross City, Cedar Key picking up very heavy amounts of rain. Anywhere between 1 to 2 inches per hour has fallen, and we could be dealing with another 5 inches by tomorrow morning. Gusty winds between 2 and 6 o'clock with an isolated threat of tornadoes and rising rivers. The good news right now in terms of storm surge, if you're out in Cedar Key and you're still listening to us, we have offshore winds. So that wind out of the east has been pushing water away from the Gulf of Mexico, but that's going to change here tomorrow morning as our winds will shift to the west, and with that onshore flow, we could be dealing with a tremendous amount of flooding right along the coast. Now, I want to give you an idea of how big this storm is. Folks, it's 1,300 miles from D.C. down to Key West, and the outflow, the cloud cover from this system extends from D.C. all the way to Key West to that main center of circulation. Tropical storm force winds upwards of 400 miles on either side of the circulation center. As it's moving right up towards Jacksonville, you can see the breadth of this storm, the magnitude of the storm as it's moving off towards the north. Now, we do have that chance of tornadoes again. We have a tornado watch for potential development of tornadoes. No active tornadoes to speak of right now. The potential exists for tornadoes through 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, and that includes many parts of our viewing area here across Gainesville heading towards Ocala and into Marion County. Watch for that threat of tornadoes, and of course we're dealing with some flooding conditions, and not too much right now in terms of active flooding, but with more rain to come and with that wind switching off toward the coast here to the west tomorrow morning, we're going to watch for flooding conditions from Cedar Key up towards Dixie County. That's going to be an issue here. Wind gusts, as I mentioned, they're going to pick up. We're in the 40 and 50 mile an hour range, but watch as we progress through time. Tomorrow morning here, heading into 3 a.m., we're dealing with 60 to 70, even 80 mile per hour gusts in a few locations, near the 60 mile per hour range around 4:30. And then as we see the center of circulation begin to push up to the northwest, we'll start to see those winds slacken along the coast. But there's that switch in the winds. We went from an offshore flow here through the afternoon and evening hours tonight to an onshore flow tomorrow morning. That's when the storm surge potential begins to build up along the coast, so we're going to have to watch that. Now, our futurecast brings all this moisture, this energy up to the northwest. You can see that circulation center pushing up towards Perry and Lake City and Tallahassee. Come tomorrow morning, and then we can start to stand down tomorrow afternoon as things begin to settle down here, and we can turn that faucet off, turn that rain off here, but we're going to pump the heat right back in here into your forecast into the 80s. And if we end up losing electricity for long periods of time, that unfortunately is going to cause a very sticky and uncomfortable situation for many parts of our region here heading into next weekend. So we'll keep an eye on things here in the Weather Center. If any tornadoes develop, we will be right back on the air and make sure you're aware of it, and we appreciate you standing by. Jonathan?
All right. Ryan, thanks so much for that. We got Lauren Poe, the mayor of Gainesville, on the phone with us right now. And Mayor, good of you to take time. How are things going so far?
So far, it's been pretty quiet in Gainesville. We've had about 11,000 of our electric customers who we have power restored to. Currently, we have about 3,100 customers without power. We are getting reports of some downed trees in the roads and some downed lines, and winds are starting to pick up here. And so we're really about to head into the serious part of this tropical storm.
Do you feel like you've got everything all buttoned down? You have everything all set to go? Because I know you put a lot of preparation into what's coming. So you feel like everything is all systems go?
Yeah, we're really grateful for how much our residents here in the city and all across the county put into their preparation, getting their supplies early, and then really by about 4 o'clock today, everybody was sheltered either at one of our 18 shelters around the city and county or in their homes, and they've been staying off the roads and just waiting for this thing to pass.
And Mayor, because this the peak of this storm is going to hit during the overnight hours in just a couple of hours from now, how does that change the way that you respond to it, that it's going to be in the dark of night when all this is happening?
Well, our first responders and our utility workers both are going to not put their own lives in danger when the wind speeds reach really that 40 to 45 mile an hour range. And so it's just going to be important that everybody stay put once these winds get up really high. Once we get a little bit of daylight and the winds start to drop a little bit, hopefully we're hoping by around noon, we'll start going out and doing what we call rapid assessment of damage, or RAD. And try to get a handle on what we need to do to get everybody restored and get the roads cleared.
And you've been watching the track of this storm just like everybody else, so you know that it now has sort of moved inland, which now kind of has a bead on Gainesville as it continues to move north. Is that worry you more, or do you think that maybe it's going to go ahead and decay more by the time it gets to Gainesville?
Well, it's one of those, there's no great scenario, but we, I think, would rather deal with a weaker system that passed over us rather than something like a Cat 3 that was just off the coast, and we were going to deal with those, significantly higher winds and the tornado activity and everything that goes along with that. So we're hoping it continues to weaken as it moves north.
And Mayor, at this point, what is your biggest concern with this storm and its aftermath?
Our biggest concern is just making sure that people stay indoors and don't decide that they might want to go out and take a peek at the damage or assess how the roads or anything. Our professional first responders and our professional utility workers will make sure that they get everything sorted out as quickly as possible. But my biggest fear is that people start going out and put themselves.
And Mayor, on that note, you had mentioned the 18 shelters. For the people who are still watching this at home, is it too late to go to those shelters now? Do you recommend just staying and hunkering down inside?
I think we may have lost him. Hello? Mayor, can you hear us? Now we may have lost him. Well, if you're just joining us right now, because we've been keeping an eye on Hurricane Irma as it continues its trek north, it did move inland at some point. In fact, if we can just put up the Doppler radar and give you an idea of the size and scope of the storm as it now is moving farther north, and you can see right there the intense, the reds and the brighter, or darker, I should say, oranges. Those are the bands that have the most activity with them, the most rain, the biggest winds, but some of the outer bands as well. They can also be damaging. But this storm now, as you can see, it has moved inland. It is now east of Tampa, and it continues its trek north. And as it does that, because it's over land now, it'll start to dissipate or lose some of its energy. With that said, though, we're still talking about a storm right now that is a Category 2. It is 100-mile-an-hour sustained winds, the gusts about 120 miles an hour. And as it does move north, you're going to see damage, you're going to see some destruction, you're going to see some down power lines. Millions of people right now in Florida in the dark because they have lost power. And this is not a process that's going to take a matter of minutes or hours. It is going to be days before power is restored. They don't just have a line down, they don't just have a pole down. There are areas where all the poles are down and the lines are gone. So they have to replant poles and restring wires, and that takes a long time, and they have to wait till all of this storm has moved out.
And there is so much to worry about when it comes to this storm. We've heard it from our meteorologists here in the team, and as well as the first responders that we've talked to in Gainesville. We're talking about winds that could reach up to 90 miles per hour. The gusts could reach up to 90 miles per hour with the winds themselves, 55 to 70 miles per hour. Something else to be aware of here, flash flood watch in effect right now. They're saying at the peak of all of this, there may be an additional 8 to 12 inches of water on the ground. And because of that, rivers, they may overflow, like the Suwannee River, something to be aware of if you are along the riverbanks there. And also small streams, they may turn into instantly raging rivers. And that's something you always have to watch out for, because you drive into these streets like this, where you think, oh, it's okay, I can just make it over. And then all of a sudden you find yourselves caught in the current where you aren't able to move at all. So something to be aware of with this storm. And we've also talked about a tornado watch in effect right now. The situation that means is favorable for hurricanes. It doesn't mean that there is a hurricane right now on the ground, but a lot of factors to be aware of in this situation right here.
Yeah, this was video that was shot earlier from Sweetwater, Florida, and I believe this is when the eye was going over, because you can see it is relatively calm. You look up. The craziest part about a hurricane, if you've never ridden one out, and especially in the daytime, when the eye comes over you, literally the sun comes out and all is calm.
You think it's almost okay.
It's like somebody hit the switch and the winds just are gone, and then the sun comes out, and then comes the backside of the storm, so it all starts again. And with this one, Irma is so big that we have seen these relentless rain bands and hours of strong winds. Hours. And again, let's get to Natasha Chen. She's joining us from Tampa, and she has been sitting through hours of this rain that's going through, and now you're starting to see some of the stronger bands of the storm as it's moving just to the east of you.
That's right. We are going to have the eye pass just to the east of Tampa, and that's good news for the residents here. But like you said, there are still constant bands of rain coming at us right now. If we just show you across the river, this is the Hillsborough River right here. There's still lights on in this downtown area where you can see the reflection of the water that's just skimming. There are wind gusts still sucking the water south, sucking that river water south, which means all of that is going to come back with a vengeance at some point. And you see those swaying trees all over the place. So we have also been seeing transformers blow across the river from us, and that means from time to time we are seeing pockets of Tampa go dark and then come back up depending on which buildings have generators. Of course, there are more than 3 million people right now across the state of Florida without power at all.
And I know that the curfew went into effect.
The storm has been pounding parts of Florida.
Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, we're about to get punched in the face.
Already, we're seeing damage from possible tornadoes spawned by the hurricane. One is believed to have touched down in Fort Lauderdale, scattering debris, ripping down power lines, and snapping and splitting trees. The storm surge pushed into downtown Miami, flooding the streets. The hurricane-force winds snapped a construction crane. People holed up nearby could hear that over the sound of the wind.
Heard a loud crack. And then like a boom that kind of followed that, and so I assumed that something large fell, and I looked out the window and looked up, and I saw the just some remnants of a crane falling down to the building.
The winds knocked out power to more than 750,000 homes and businesses in the Miami-Dade area. As the storm moves up the west coast of Florida, people prepare for the storm in Tampa, which has not seen a direct hit from a major hurricane since 1921.
We have, for 90 years, avoided this day. But I think our day has come.
We are now hearing of the first storm-related death in Orange County, a crash that occurred there, and we know that there are other crashes right now awaiting troopers to respond because they have to wait until the winds have calmed down a bit. Back to you, Jonathan and Nancy.
And Natasha, I wanted to ask you a little bit. You were talking about the dangers that people have already encountered. I know a curfew went into effect early this evening. Do you think that most people have heeded that curfew?
We certainly have not seen anyone at all walking the riverbank here in Tampa, which is a good thing. People were still out and about earlier in the afternoon, but the curfew here was 6 o'clock, and it seems after that time we did not see anyone out here. I know in other parts of Florida we have gotten reports of people actually venturing out past curfew. Not a good idea. The mayor here in Tampa and officials in other counties have made it absolutely clear they can cite and arrest people that are out after curfew. And they don't want to arrest people, but it is really for their own safety to try and get them indoors.
Absolutely. Natasha Chen joining us from Tampa. Natasha, thank you very much for your live reports there. And we want to turn things now to Gabby Arzula, who is joining us from the Alachua County Emergency Operations Center. And I understand, Gabby, that you have some new information that you just got.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a few moments ago, our PIO, Art 4G, came to us and said that they are getting a tremendous amount of calls regarding trees. Now, we know that Gainesville is known for the trees. We are the city of the trees. So it is unfortunately not a surprise that the trees are coming down, and they're actually getting a lot more calls than the people that they're able to send out to clear the trees. Now, these trees are going on people's homes, they're going on cars, and even in the middle of the road. So they are getting an abundance of calls. Luckily, there have been no fatalities, thank goodness. So there have been a few calls actually to the fire department to go out and clear some trees that have entered people's homes. Again, no fatalities. And also, I spoke to the fire chief here in Alachua County, and he told us that they upped their staffing. Normally they're at 70, now they're at over 110. And again, they've been patrolling the areas, and they said that calls are still relatively light. They're still all storm related, and especially now with the trees, they're getting a little bit of a surge with that. And what's kind of scary about this is that all these trees are falling, but everyone is still on patrol, meaning that winds are only under 40 miles an hour. So we're definitely taking a look to see. We're supposed to be projected at around 6 o'clock to be a lot higher than 40. So they're a little bit worried on how the trees are going to be holding up since it's still under 40 and they're getting an abundance of falls thus far.
Sure. And are they responding to those calls that you had mentioned with the trees down? They're going out there and they're assessing that damage as we speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the wind speeds are still under 40, so they're still on patrol and they're going over there to clear them out. But there's still too many that they can't clear them out in time, especially those that are on the road that need to be chainsawed through to move them.
Absolutely. And Gabby, I know you've been at the Emergency Operations Center for quite some time now. What is your general sense of the room when you talk about the leaders of Alachua County? What are they doing there? Do they seem, you had mentioned that they had upped their staffing. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
A lot of people saying that they even over-prepared for this moment. So everyone here is kind of trying to play out where the storm is and adjusting with that. So, I mean, they all have backup plans and they all have ammo in which they're able to go out to these things. Unfortunately, with the trees, it's definitely been a lot more than expected. But everybody here hasn't really received anything too out of the ordinary so far. So everyone is still kind of on standby because we're expecting some higher speeds later on in the early morning. So again, everyone's on standby, but again, they're also very confident because they say that they've over-prepared for this moment so far.
And what kind of precautions are officials there at the Emergency Operations Center urging people to take at this point of the night?
Yeah, so at this point, because all these trees are falling, they really want people to hunker down in their homes. They don't want people to move the limbs out. They don't even if it fell on their home, to not even touch it, because winds are going crazy, the rain is going crazy. So they really want people to just call 911, even after, which is really important, even after if winds are past 40, that they're asked to stop their patrol, they still want people to call 911. So yeah, definitely to not go out, don't touch anything. If a power line falls, don't go near it. They really just want people to stay inside, preferably nowhere near a window. So that's so far what they're asking Alachua County residents to do.
It's good advice, considering, especially when a power line goes down, it's dark outside, the power line goes down, and then you've got water. So electricity and water, that's like you learn in 3rd grade. It travels right through it. You just get anywhere near something, it's charged. So just stay inside, ride out the storm. If you lose your power, you lose your power. Hopefully you have some candles inside and you're good to go. What other concerns do they have right now as things start to now pick up around the area?
I mean, other than the trees, again, they're still kind of on standby. Other than that, I mean, especially like what you said with the power, that was a big issue. And there was one case where a power line fell into somebody's home. And thankfully, again, there were no fatalities with that. So it's really just keeping an eye out, really just being careful, staying in your homes, and just to not go outside.
All right. We appreciate it, Gabby. We'll check back with you as the night progresses. Thanks very much for that. And want to show you some video. One of the sea cows, a manatee, got himself beached.
Oh.
And this is what happens when all that water got sucked out. You know, manatees, I'm sure this one didn't know which way to go as the water was pulled out. And that gives you an idea of how fast the water was yanked out to sea. But you can see volunteers there now taking care of the animal. And the water will come back, but it's going to take some time. Again, we're watching. That's the surge. That's what they call the storm surge. When it comes back in, it will come back in full force. This was just north of Sarasota. And again, that's one of the areas we saw that was getting hit earlier. And you can see now there's no rain right there, just some winds. That gives you an idea. Perhaps this was when the eye was making its way over that area earlier this afternoon. But again, a manatee there stuck in the mud. And it's nice to see some folks were volunteering to try and help the animal out.
Absolutely. But you just realize how dramatic this storm surge is when you see images like this, and we've seen them all evening, of just that water receding before it finally comes back with full force. It really just shows you how powerful this storm is. And we've been tracking it now for several days. But to really see it like this, it is startling.
Well, it was huge, and it was funny. Ryan Miller was just showing us a second ago the size of the storm, saying that some of the outer bands were reaching all the way up to D.C., all the way down to the Keys. You're talking 1,300 miles big. But right now, the severity, the most severe part of the storm, is focused in the central part of Florida, as it's now the eye, or what's left of the eye, because it is still a hurricane, is blowing east of Tampa and making its way up towards Jacksonville and Gainesville into the northern part of the state. And again, they do have a hurricane watch out in effect there, a warning, and they also have the watch up north. I mean, all the way into, we're talking Georgia and Alabama. They're going to be feeling the effects of this, and this is a very strong storm. This is not one to be trifling with, and it's not one to consider that maybe, oh, it's just a Category 1, no big deal. It is a very big deal. There's very strong winds out there. I think it's Category 2. It's 100 miles an hour sustained winds, so this is a very dangerous storm.
And anytime you even mention tropical storm force winds, I mean, those can be catastrophic on their own, much less part of a hurricane. We want to bring in Nicole Fierro in Gainesville. And Nicole, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're seeing?
Absolutely. We are at the Quality Inn right now in Gainesville, and we are seeing a lot of rain. A big gust of wind keeps on coming through about every 30 seconds. I'm sure you'll see it in just a moment. But what we did see just a couple of seconds ago and here was a power box exploding right across the street. It made a huge boom and sent a spark, which was pretty terrifying. I even jumped, but you can see there's some very strong winds coming out right now, shaking these trees all over, and the rain is really coming down. A lot of residents here are watching the storm from inside, coming out and taking pictures, then running back in, and they're all bracing to lose power tonight and just getting ready to ride out the storm inside, which many people should do, and police are suggesting that people do, given that there's already many trees down on local roadways here.
Sure. And Nicole, you had mentioned you're at the Quality Inn there. One thing I thought was very interesting when we are talking about the coverage here is that there are a lot of people who evacuated to Gainesville from areas that are along the coast, expecting those areas to be hit the hardest. Have you encountered those kind of people?
Yeah. Absolutely. We actually got the last 2 rooms here, and on our drive over, we were trying to get a hotel. We called 16. They were all completely sold out. This parking lot is absolutely packed with cars, and we've run into a ton of people here telling us that they came here to ride out the storm and stay safe. But, you know, with these winds and rain right now, we don't know what's going to really happen here. I mean, we'll be sure to show you. We'll be live here all night, all morning to keep tracking it. But it must be scary for a lot of people that thought this would be a safe place.
What's the sense you get as far as the severity of the storm? I mean, this is still a very powerful storm as it's moving closer and closer to Gainesville. I mean, within the next couple of hours, you'll start to feel some of the fury of this thing. I mean, it may be downgraded to a hurricane, you know, Category 1, but that doesn't mean anything. It's still 70, 80 mile an hour winds. That's pretty severe.
Absolutely. I mean, right now we're watching these trees, these large palm trees just completely swaying. And honestly, I don't feel like the wind is too strong right now, but every couple of minutes it keeps changing. And, you know, within the last hour, the rain has really picked up over here. It was not coming down this much earlier, just a little bit ago. So, I mean, it could change very quickly.
All right, listen, Nicole, we appreciate you taking the time. Please stay safe, and we'll check back with you as the night progresses along. And want to show some folks at home to give you an idea of just how severe this storm is, how powerful this storm is. Look at this video we just got in.
Wow.
Yep.
Sheared off.
Can barely read. University Village, that's pretty much all you got left. You don't even see the picture of what it was. Ripped apart. You're talking 110, 120 mile an hour winds that came ashore, and it made landfall. It was, I think it was blowing 130, the second landfall it made after it blew through the Keys. And it'll be interesting to see the video at first light from the Keys, what happened down there, because the cameras that were set up that we were watching throughout the afternoon as far as what was taking place, you know, those are from concrete structures that are built to sustain Category 5 type storms. But there are so many. If you've been to the Keys, it's an enchanting place. It is beautiful. There's a lot of, you know, smaller homes and smaller dwellings, wood dwellings, bars and restaurants and kind of fun little places to go. I have
a piece of paradise.
Yeah, I have to believe they took it on the chin too. They took a direct hit down there, and that was still was a Category 4 storm that blew in. So it'll be interesting to see at first light when they start to assess the damage and we start to see some videotape of what happened down there. Because again, tonight it's hard at night to really size up what's happening. You know, we're showing you pictures of some flooded neighborhoods. We're showing you trees that are down. But if you're in the path of the storm, especially as Gainesville folks now are kind of, you know, hunkering down and getting ready to ride this out, you're going to start to see, it sounds like a freight train. Literally, it's going to sound like your house is a car on a freight train and you're hauling down the tracks. You're going to hear all kinds of noises. Things may hit your house. I mean, these are very powerful winds that are swirling around out there. And again, don't go out and investigate. Just ride the storm out and be safe.
Well, you know, you talk about that perspective that you get at first daylight. You've covered plenty of hurricanes in the aftermath. I've covered tornadoes in the aftermath and devastations that an EF5 can bring. And one thing that really struck me during disaster coverage is you see these images and you think, okay, this is a bad house, this is a bad street. But really when daylight hits is when you look at the aerial shots and you realize it's not just this one block, it's not just this one little neck of the woods, but you zoom out and you realize just swaths of areas are devastated. They're demolished, they are destroyed, and I think that's something we'll get a clearer eye on once daylight comes.
And that's, you know, when you cover hurricanes, it's more of a micro issue because, you know, one neighborhood could be totally untouched and the next neighborhood's gone. When it's a hurricane, especially this big and this powerful, it's more of a macro issue. I mean, it's everything in this storm's path is going to be touched in some form or fashion. Whether it's all the power lines are gone or whether homes that were standing, you know, yesterday are now just the foundation block. I mean, whatever it is, the power of this storm, we're going to be able to size it up more when we have first light tomorrow and the storm has passed by. But right now in areas like Gainesville and Jacksonville and further up to the north of the Florida area, you know, you're going to see what this storm is capable of doing. And that's why in the Gainesville area, pretty much for the last 7 or 8 hours, we've been talking to the folks who are staging in the EOCs, and they're basically hunkering down, and they've done all the preparations that they can do to get ready for this. But now it is time to put the first responders away because they do not want to risk their lives going out there because some knucklehead wants to take a drive in the middle of 90-mile-an-hour winds and take some pictures. What happens to you at this point is basically you're on your own. So if you crash into something or you hydroplane, you know, nice going. It's just not a smart play. They tell you, stay inside for a reason. You know, they're not asking you. They're not suggesting it. They're telling you, just stay inside because they have seen what happens to people that decide to venture out in the middle of a hurricane to just get curious. I mean, yes, you're all curious. Everybody gets that. But don't take any chances with your life or anybody in your family's lives. You know, that's just not what to do.
And you mentioned the certain mileage per hour for winds. That would have to be 40 miles per hour before first responders stop responding to calls. Right now, that is not hit 40 miles per hour. I want to talk a little bit about the forecast in the coming minutes, in the coming hours. And for that, let's turn things over to meteorologist Molly Cochran. And Molly, what can you tell us about the wind speed right there?
Yeah, so we're going to check out those wind speeds in just a second. I can tell you that they are continuing to crank up in some places in the Gainesville area. We have that tornado watch still in effect until 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, so that has been extended for the Gainesville area and points east. But back towards Levy County, Dixie County, along the immediate coastline, that does not include you for the overnight hours. Here's a look at our radar. You can see these heavier bands. This is called a feeder band off the immediate coastline. This is typically where we would look for the points of rotation, so the possibility of these bands coming on shore and causing for some tornadoes. But right now you can just see the heavier downpours north of Daytona Beach. So this is it. This is definitely the time we've been warning about all day long. For the Gainesville area, we are about to get in the thick of the heaviest rainfall. So here's a zoomed in look. Gainesville on south, starting to see these bands of orange and red coming our way. Definitely going to be adding up very quickly. A lot of places in the Gainesville area and the surrounding suburbs have been receiving about 4 or 5 inches already today. So adding up overnight tonight. As we take a look here, the red bands just south of Palm Coast able to produce over an inch per hour. So definitely falling very, very quickly. Anywhere we see the yellow and orange just to the south of Gainesville, about a ½ inch, if not more, close to an inch per hour. So again, this is definitely going to be causing for some flooding problems. That flood watch extends until 8 o'clock tomorrow night for Gilchrist, Dixie, and also Levy County. Marion County now under a flood warning. So just want to exercise caution. You don't want to leave your home until tomorrow afternoon if you can. And another big threat is as these winds start to increase, we have all of this water adding up. That's going to really saturate things and bring up those trees more easily. So here's a look at Irma's track. Still a Category 2 storm. Maximum sustained winds of 100 miles per hour. It's 25 miles south of Lakeland, Florida. As it interacts with land, it's going to continue to weaken, so that's definitely a good thing. By 8 o'clock Monday, we will watch that turn into a Category 1 storm and head off to the northwest. Then from there, it goes towards the Birmingham area and into the Tennessee Valley, continuing to lose strength. But again, now through about 6 a.m. is when the gusty winds pick up, the possibility for that flooding. So here's a look at our wind speeds right now. These are peak wind gusts, 55 miles per hour in the Gainesville area. So as Jonathan and Nancy were mentioning, you're on your own at this point. We're up over 40 miles per hour, 44 in Cross City, 45 in Keystone Heights. So please just exercise caution, keep your phone on hand, keep the TV turned on for any of those warnings that come in, and be prepared that these wind speeds are going to stick around for quite a while. So here's a look Monday at 10:30 in the morning, still in the upper 50s to low 60s. Lake City along the immediate coastline, also near Cedar Key. Off to our east, back towards Jacksonville, still in the upper 50s. Then as we play this forward through about 2 o'clock, we're still in the upper 30s to low 40s through about 2 o'clock Monday afternoon. So even as this storm starts to scoot out of our area, these wind speeds are still going to be cranking. Even through Monday night at 10 o'clock, notice some of us still in the low to mid 20s for those wind speeds. Here's a look at Futurecast. So as I mentioned, the heavy rain bands that we were warning about all evening long now getting into the Gainesville area. We'll likely see some flood warnings be issued overnight tonight. And here's a look at 4 a.m. You can see the darker red bands still in the Gainesville area, lifting off to the north, but still remaining Lake City, even back towards Cedar Key along the immediate coastline. 6 a.m. tomorrow, starting to deteriorate a little bit in Gainesville, and we'll start to see that relief come in right around 9, 10 o'clock. And then from there, after 10 o'clock, maybe by lunchtime onward, you might even be able to get outside and start to assess the damage, but we have to remember that those wind gusts are still going to be in the 30s. Here's a look at our Futurecast rainfall totals. So this is a look through about midnight on Tuesday, upwards of about 5, 6 inches in a few places. This is just one computer model, and I can tell you in Gainesville itself, you've already received about 4 inches in a few locations. So the main impacts from now through about 6 a.m., we're talking heavy rainfall, gusty winds, some places in excess of about 70 miles per hour. Also a tornado threat for some of us. Gainesville points east. And then even as the rain starts to wind down tomorrow, we have to remember the creeks, the rivers, and the streams will continue to rise. And I do think the threat for down branches and uprooted trees will continue through the day tomorrow. So if you are out driving around, maybe walking on the sidewalk, just keep that in mind because the ground is very, very saturated. Here's a look at that extended forecast. So if you are without power through the middle to later half of the week, Ryan Miller brought up a great point. AC might not be your thing. You might have to turn on the fan if you're without power. Definitely expecting those temperatures to get into the upper 80s. But as we go through tonight, this is the worst of it. We'll get through the day tomorrow, and then from there we will start to see things clear out, and hopefully can get out and assess the damage. Nancy, Jonathan.
All right, Molly, thanks very much. When you say turn on the fan if you have no power, you're talking about the fan, you just kind of fan yourself. All right, looking at some live pictures now, some folks that are out just sort of surveying what's going on with some of the lines that are up. This is in Tampa, and again, Tampa now, they were the bullseye for a while there. We thought we were going to have a Category 4 storm that was going to blow up into the Gulf and then just go dead on into
look at
Tampa.
That. They're lifting up the light
right there. Taking one of the lights out of the middle of the street. But that didn't happen. What happened was the storm caught the northern edge of Cuba. It took a little of the power away from the storm there, and then when it made the trek north, it was a Hurricane Category 4, 140 mile an hour, 130 mile an hour winds, and then as it slowly made its way up into Florida, it banged into the Keys hard. That was the first landfall, and that was all the projections is that was going to happen. It made a second landfall after that at about 120 mile an hour winds, and then since then it has been sort of decaying, but you'd never know that. If you were in the path of this thing, they have seen the outer bands for hours. It's been on shore now for 14, 15 hours. It is still blowing 100 mile an hour sustained winds. It is still throwing down sheets of rain. It is still causing all kinds of damage and destruction in its path. It is a very serious storm because it was so powerful. We knew that when it was a Category 5 blowing in the Atlantic for days. And now here it is. This is sort of the dying end of this hurricane, and it is still very powerful, very dangerous.
But regardless, if you're in the Keys or if you're in Tampa or West Palm or Miami, you will be affected by this storm. Regardless, if you're in the state of Florida and beyond that, we've seen in bordering states as well. But that includes Tallahassee. And for the latest on what's going on there, here's Jacqueline Kelly. Oh, Jacqueline, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the conditions that you're seeing in Tallahassee?
Well, here in downtown Tallahassee, things really have yet to really begun. We're not going to feel the brunt of this storm until about 4 a.m. until noon tomorrow. So as you can see, it's raining, light breezes here and there, but of course, that's going to change here in the next few hours when those winds start picking up. They're expecting, sustained winds of 40 to 60 miles per hour with wind gusts up to 75 miles an hour. Of course, that is the big concern here. But for folks here in Tallahassee, they were preparing for worst case scenario. When they woke up this morning, they were told they could potentially be expecting a direct hit from Irma. So things have really improved as far as the outlook. It looks like Irma is going to pass just east of Tallahassee, which is good news for residents here. But of course, they still have to worry about the high winds. They have to worry about down power lines, down trees. They're expecting a lot of that. But as you can see, this is a ghost town out here. And this is because they've instituted a countywide curfew. Went into effect around 9 p.m. It won't be lifted until about 7 a.m. So people have been told to shelter in place and just hold out, ride out this storm. Don't worry about the down power lines, trees. Just let crews work. And, of course, the wind, is the big story here.
And Jacqueline, have they had any problems reported in Tallahassee? And again, you're hours away from seeing the brunt of the storm. What you've been seeing are some of the outer bands, which, some of those can pack a punch as well. Any problems caused by any of that?
Some small problems. We've had, a few down tree limbs and things like that have, fallen on power lines, and it's knocked out power, but to a relatively few amount of people. And, the good news is things really haven't picked up yet, so utility crews are still out here, and they've been able to restore that power and fix that stuff as they go along throughout the night. So, they're restoring the power pretty quickly, but, as you know, once it gets to 35, 40 miles an hour, that's when the utility crews are going to have to get off the road. So that potentially could change. And, city officials have been warning people, hey, be prepared to be without power for long periods of time, even days. But so far, they've been able to restore the power pretty quickly to people who had lost power.
And Jacqueline, because Tallahassee is so far to the north of Florida, can you talk a little bit about the preparations and the emergency action plans that have been put in place for what happens after the storm passes?
Well, we know that they are, ready to go. We've got a lot of crews standing by, ready to help wherever they're needed. That's as far as I know, as far as their preparations. A lot of things change. I mean, starting, first thing this morning, they were preparing for a direct hit. So they've opened up extra shelters and things like that. Now it looks like they're, things have improved forecast-wise. If Irma continues east as it climbs up the Florida coast, it's going to skirt by them on the east side, which is good news for folks down here.
Yeah, there's no question. It's always a gamble. Anytime one of these giant hurricanes blow into the Gulf, especially, everybody's wondering, where's this thing going? Tallahassee's no stranger to big storms. They've seen them in the past, but, at least this time it looks like you're just going to get probably some of the outer bands, maybe 40, 50-mile-an-hour gusts, but that's all stuff you guys have seen before.
Exactly. I mean, the only problem here is that, they are worried about the power outages and a lot of damage to the power grid, that it didn't really hold up well in, with Hurricane Hermine. So, there's some concerns that, even a little bit of wind, I mean, even if it is tropical storm force winds or even, a low Category 1 force hurricane winds, there is some concern that the power grid could take a big hit down here.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Well, listen, Jacqueline, you be safe up there. Thank you very much for the report, and we will check back with you as we continue to monitor the progress of this storm as it moves north. Thank you. And the left side of your screen, what you're looking at, social media. We're kind of monitoring social media to see what's happening there. And what you're seeing is that's an airport runway that's being used as a staging area for a lot of the vehicles that are going to be used to kind of swarm Florida to restore power. Those are all the power companies, and they put their vehicles there for a number of reasons. One, there's no trees anywhere nearby to fall on their vehicles, as you can see, because it's all runways. And two, they're not using the runways right now because all the airports have been shut down. There is nothing that is flying in any airport coming in and out of Florida right now. And in fact, we just checked recently in the last few hours, and the Miami National and Tampa, they're all shut down until at least tomorrow when they can reassess what they can do. Because most of the planes, by the way, they get out of airports. Those are expensive. Those planes are very expensive, so they get them out of all the airports ahead of the storm if they can't put them in a hangar, and then they'll take them to markets or cities where they don't have any issues with any weather. So it'll be a little while before they get that all figured out and get the airports back up and running.
And they did that, in fact, days ahead of time. I saw the last flights coming out of Miami Friday night, and Tampa as well as Orlando stopping and grounding flights as well, and for good reason. And we want to go back now to Brad Bell, who joins us from Tampa. And Brad, can you tell us a little bit about what the situation is for you now? How is the wind and how is the rain?
Well, it's almost a little eerie because it's, again, you may hear this piece of building equipment, I think it's HVAC or something over here roaring right now. But again, we have been outside broadcasting live nonstop since 4:30 on Sunday, and it's been loud. The wind's been howling, and it's been coming through these buildings, and it is loud. There's a roar. There really is a roar. And now it's actually pretty quiet. It's still raining, but not a lot. I mean, it's been a gully washer for hours and hours out here. But right now, it's not too bad at all. We were talking about the cranes. I don't know. Can you see the cranes at all still? If you give it a try, Josh, it doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be pretty, but he may be able to open up the iris and the camera enough. He's a very good cameraman and show those cranes. So those are our wind direction indicators, and they are now pointing there's that equipment has quieted down, so you can actually just hear the ambient sound now. It's not too bad. So those now are pointed, by my reckoning, due south. They used to be pointed due west, and they were pointed due west all day long, and that was the wind direction, and that was blowing the water away from here. Now Tampa Bay is a north-south oriented body of water, so this is still blowing the water out of Tampa Bay. But that's a significant shift, 90-degree shift in the direction of the wind, as indicated by those cranes. And we've been watching those cranes. If you've been following our coverage, we've been watching those cranes all afternoon. They're still standing, which is the really good news. They're also still lit up. The power is still on, as you can see here where we are. Again, I'm at a sheltered spot. So there is more wind than it appears. I'm not blowing around right now. My head, I don't have my hood up. If I walked a half a block this way, I would have to do that. But what we were seeing down here in hours past was that at each block, cross streets here, familiar in Gainesville with Tampa. This is Ashley, and the Riverwalk is on the other side of these buildings. So at each cross street, we were seeing these just whoosh. The wind was just going like that, and the palm trees were really blowing in the breeze. Not so much anymore at all. Really quieting down. Now that equipment that I was talking about in the building here has stopped, I can still hear the wind, but nothing like the roar that we were experiencing before. I look across the street at the trees are actually standing still right now mid-block. So the cranes, the wind, everything is telling us that, at least for Tampa, the first part of this storm is passing, and we'll see what the tail end rotation will do to us, and monitoring that potential storm surge is certainly something that we're going to be about, but it looks like we're okay. At this point, as this storm lessens. Again, we did see the arcing from the ground. Over the years, covering ice storms up north or various weather things, you see when trees fall on power lines and there's an electrical arcing, and it makes this blue light in the sky, sometimes different colors as well. And there was transformers, just power lines getting hit with trees, power lines crossing, all sorts of things that you don't want to have happen. And a while ago, the sky just absolutely lit up, and it was on the other side of the Hillsborough River, South Tampa direction, and towards St. Pete, and I was like, what? Well, there goes our power, but our power didn't even waver here. These power grids are so well engineered now that they can isolate things. So there's going to be some power outages, I'm sure, but right down here in downtown Tampa, nothing. And I mentioned earlier on, if not a fear, certainly a respect for the fact that with these tall buildings, the plate glass can come flying out. I've seen it before. I saw it in Katrina. I saw it in Rita. In Houston, but it did not happen here that I'm aware of.
Well, Brad, the one
nice thing any emergency response
is behind you. You're not seeing the wind howling like we were, because we've been coming to you for hours, and you could see sheets of rain coming down, and the wind just howling, and it looks like, something's calmed down.
Oh yeah,
which is good news. But I can tell you this: it's
calmed down a bunch.
Yeah, well, I can tell you where Irma is right now. We know that it is now east of Tampa.
Okay.
It is nearing Lakeland. It is still a Category 2 storm, so this is a very sizable and significant storm. It is 121 miles away from Gainesville, so you're looking, this is going to take us probably another 2.5, 3, maybe 4 hours before we start seeing the brunt of that move into the Gainesville area. Brad, thanks very much. We want to get over to Steve Rudin real quick to talk about the storm, because, this storm is still, we don't want to downgrade this at all. We don't want to diminish what this is. This is a very powerful storm. In fact, aren't you a little shocked that it's still a Cat 2, even though it's over land now?
Yeah, and it's been weakening by about 5 to 10 miles per hour each update that we have had over the last couple of hours. So we're waiting for that 1 a.m. update to come in. That's going to be here probably in about 10 to 12 minutes or so. Want to give you all an update in terms of a tornado watch that remains in effect for the Gainesville area. This is until 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday. So originally it was set to expire at midnight. Then they extended it until 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. It does not include Otter Creek, so good news there. Take a look at radar and looking at improving conditions. If you were to divide the state right in half, Fort Myers, a complete difference than what it was like just 5-6 hours ago. Tampa, where Brad was, now beginning to clear out nicely. But this area right over here where you see the brighter oranges and the red lifting up toward Orlando, that is the area that is going to find the gusty winds, the very, very heavy rain, and the damaging winds at that. But let's head into the Tampa area. Tampa Bay right over here. And as mentioned, Brad, we saw in the pictures, the live pictures, that is improving. It's not quite as windy and the rain not quite as heavy for very good reason, because all of this is just off toward the north and east of him. So we're watching this area right here. This is the area that's going to lift on off toward the north. If anyone has friends or family over in Orlando, they have heard the howling winds as they moved on through during the last couple of hours or so. It's not going to get any better over the next 3 or 4 hours as all this lifts on off toward the north. Kissimmee right now, looking at the heavy rains and the gusty winds, still upwards of 75 to 85, 90 miles per hour. As we head toward the Gainesville area, on and off heavier rain. At least that's what we have seen over the last couple of hours. But the heavier rain now beginning to lift in from the south, and you are going to hear the wind and you are going to hear the rain, and this is going to happen more than likely over the next hour, well into the 2 o'clock hour, 3 o'clock hour, probably until about 4 or 5 a.m. Here's the latest for you, and this is still the 12 a.m. midnight advisory. 100-mile-per-hour winds. We suspect this will go down a little bit as we move through the next half hour or so. 120-mile-per-hour gusts, and it's moving toward the north at 14 miles per hour. Now, that northerly track has not changed a whole lot over the last 5 hours, but what has changed is the pressure, and that's going up as the storm begins to weaken because it doesn't have all that fuel from the hot water over the Gulf of Mexico or the warmer water over the Gulf of Mexico. Still a Category 2, expected to become a 1, and then best news of all, by this time tomorrow night, it's not going to be a 1 at all. It's just going to be a tropical depression, and then we'll see that begin to ease into just an area of low pressure that will bring just rain, and quite a bit of rain, to parts of Illinois, southern Indiana, into Tennessee and Kentucky before it finally rains itself out. And we may see a few bit of remnants of that around our area as we move into the middle of the week. Wind gusts right now, they're picking up. You could probably hear it outside your window if you're in Gainesville, if you're in Keystone Heights. Wind gusts upwards of 40 to 55 miles per hour. Not quite as windy over in Lake City. Cross City, just around 39 for those wind gusts. Here's our future cast in terms of those wind gusts as we move through the overnight hours into early tomorrow morning. We're still going to be dealing with gusty winds tomorrow morning as all this finally begins to lift on out of here, and then conditions will begin to improve. And by tomorrow afternoon, you will see a little bit of sunshine, so better news there. Here's our future cast. Let's pay close attention to this. This is the line that we're watching right now that may lead us to the potential for some tornadic activity. Notice Gainesville right over here, 4:30 in the morning. The heaviest of the rain begins to lift off toward the north and west. So here we are, almost 1 o'clock. This is at 4:30, so 1, 2, 3, 2.5 hours to go, 3.5 hours as we move into getting this out of here, and then improving conditions around the Florida area, and then the rain. The rain will come to an end. Could be looking at anywhere between 4 to 8 inches by the time this whole system moves on out. So the gustiest of the winds, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Still have that tornado threat with the tornado watch out there, rising rivers, and the potential for flash flooding. And we are going to keep this as a Category 2 at least for right now. Waiting for that 1 o'clock update. We will bring it to you right when it comes in, but now we head back to the news desk.
We will stand by for that, Steve. Thank you very much. Now, Steve had mentioned that winds in Gainesville gusting right now at 53 miles per hour. That's important for one reason, especially because we've been talking about how first responders say they will not go out on the streets once it hits 40 miles per hour. We have not gotten confirmation of that, but we have gotten confirmation from the Gainesville Sun reporting that Alachua County Sheriff's Office right now shutting down roads across the county until further notice. So heads up for everyone right now that all roads in Alachua County now shut down for the safety of everyone in Alachua County, because when you talk about the roads out there, winds gusting that bad, first of all, it's not safe to drive in part just on its own, but then you have down trees, down wires that create just a plethora of more problems.
Should let you know too, if you're just tuning in, perhaps if you're watching us here in the Washington D.C. area, Maryland, Virginia, D.C., whatever, we're on the air helping our friends down in Florida because the Gainesville station, that's one of our sister stations, they asked for a little assistance. We were more than happy to help. So we have our resources, our meteorologists, our reporters, everybody's helping out the Gainesville folks ride through this storm. And so the job we're really trying to do here is everybody in Gainesville, we hope that you're getting something from this. We hope that we're kind of walking you through this storm. It's nothing to be afraid of, especially at this point. Now it's just time to hunker down and kind of ride this out. A lot of us, especially in the D.C. area, we have covered these kinds of hurricanes before. We have been through these kinds of storms before. So kind of lending our experience and sort of helping the folks out in Gainesville. So we're happy to do it. And the Gainesville reporters are out there as well. So we're kind of utilizing all the resources that we have to give you the most comprehensive coverage and get you through the storm.
And now we want to turn to Annalisa Gale, who is standing by in our D.C. newsroom with a look at some of the images that are appearing on social media. And Annalisa, what have you seen?
Nancy, just take a look at this one from the Martin County Sheriff's Office that's in the Treasure Coast region of Florida. They said that the entrance to Indianwood community in Indiantown is completely destroyed by a large sinkhole. There's some water rushing through what appears to be a divided road. So amazing to see this image, and certainly tomorrow that is going to create some problems for people in that community trying to get around. But those first responders